ever wondered how a nation could go to war with itself, how brothers could fight brothers, and a country could be torn in two? That's the story of the American Civil War, a defining and brutal chapter in U.S. history. It wasn't just one disagreement. It was a perfect storm of issues that had been brewing for decades. So, what were the real reasons America fought itself? Let's dive in. In the North, you have a booming industrial economy. Cities are growing, factories are churning out goods, and society is powered by wage labor. Immigrants are pouring in, and there's a strong belief in a powerful central government that can build things like railroads and canals to connect the nation. But head south, and you're in a completely different world. The southern economy is overwhelmingly agricultural, dominated by huge plantations growing cash crops like cotton, tobacco, and sugar. This entire way of life, from the economy to the social structure, is built on one institution: the enslavement of millions of African Americans. Southern society is fiercely protective of states' rights, believing each state should have the power to decide its own laws without interference from the federal government. These two regions had fundamentally different visions for America's future, and at the heart of that conflict was slavery. Now, some people might say the war was about states' rights, not slavery, and in a way they're right. The South was fighting for states' rights, but the primary right they were fighting to protect was the right to own human beings as property. It's impossible to separate the two. For decades, political compromises kept a fragile peace. The Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850, these were all attempts to balance the number of free states and slave states as the country expanded westward. Every time a new territory wanted to become a state, the question would erupt: would it be free or slave? This question determined the balance of power in Congress. More slave states meant more pro-slavery senators and representatives, giving the South more power to protect its institution. But these compromises were like putting bandages on a gaping wound. Tensions kept rising. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 forced Northerners to help return escaped enslaved people to their owners, which outraged many in the North and fueled the abolitionist movement. Activists like Harriet Tubman with the Underground Railroad, and writers like Harriet Beecher Stowe with her powerful novel Uncle Tom's Cabin exposed the brutalities of slavery to a wider audience, turning public opinion in the North firmly against it. Then came the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. This law allowed settlers in new territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, a concept called popular sovereignty. The result: pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers flooded into Kansas. leading to a violent, bloody conflict known as Bleeding Kansas. It was a horrifying preview of the national war to come. The Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision in 1857 was another massive blow. The court ruled that African Americans were not citizens and had no rights. It also declared that the federal government could not ban slavery in the territories. For the South, it was a huge victory. For the North, it was proof that the slave power had corrupted the highest levels of government. The final straw was the election of 1860. The Republican Party, a new party formed specifically to stop the expansion of slavery, nominated Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln's name didn't even appear on the ballot in 10 southern states, but because the Democratic Party was split between northern and southern candidates, Lincoln won the presidency with purely northern support. For the South, this was a catastrophe. They saw Lincoln's election as a direct threat to their entire way of life. They believed he and the Republicans would not just stop slavery's expansion, but abolish it altogether. They felt they had lost all power and voice in the federal government. So, on December 20th, 1860, South Carolina did the unthinkable. It seceded from the Union. In the following weeks, 6 more states followed suit: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Together, they formed a new nation, the Confederate States of America. President Lincoln, in his inaugural address, pleaded for unity. He argued that secession was illegal and that he had no intention of interfering with slavery where it already existed. But he also made it clear he would not allow the Union to be dissolved. His goal was to preserve the United States. The standoff came to a head at Fort Sumter, a U.S. federal fort in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. Confederate forces demanded the fort's surrender. When the Union commander refused, the Confederates opened fire on April 12, 1861. The Civil War had begun. Lincoln's call for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion pushed for more states: Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee to join the Confederacy. The battle lines were drawn. The Union, or the North, had more people, more factories, and a better railroad system. The Confederacy, or the South, had brilliant military leaders like Robert E. Lee and the advantage of fighting a defensive war on their home turf. The war that followed was devastating, lasting for long years and costing over 620,000 lives, more than any other war in American history. Initially, the war was fought primarily to preserve the Union, but as the conflict dragged on, its purpose evolved. The turning point was Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. While it didn't free all enslaved people overnight, it officially changed the goal of the war. From that point on, the Union Army was fighting not just to save the nation, but to end slavery. This gave the North a powerful moral cause and allowed for the recruitment of nearly 200,000 African American soldiers who fought bravely for their own freedom. Major battles like Antietam, Gettysburg, and Vicksburg turned the tide in favor of the Union. General Ulysses S. Grant's relentless strategy of total war wore down the Confederacy's ability to fight. Finally, on April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, effectively ending the war. The Civil War answered two fundamental questions that had plagued the nation since its founding. First, it affirmed that the United States was one indivisible nation, not a loose collection of independent states. Second, it brought about the abolition of slavery with the passage of the 13th Amendment. The war's legacy is complex and still felt today. It saved the Union and freed millions, but it left the South devastated and created deep, lasting scars of bitterness and division. The period of Reconstruction that followed attempted to rebuild the South and integrate newly freed African Americans into society, but it largely failed, leading to a century of segregation and racial injustice. So, why did America fight itself? It was a clash of two incompatible societies, one built on industry and free labor, the other on agriculture and enslaved labor. It was a fight over economic interests, political power, and, most importantly, the profound moral question of human freedom. The Civil War was the tragic, bloody, and ultimately necessary conflict that redefined what it means to be the United States of America. Thanks for watching. If you found this history interesting, please give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. See you next time.